Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Joining me in studio, you've heard Sky Strasner talk about this class. I talked about it as well, the Level 1 handgun training class out at SS Outfitters. Joining me in studio right now, one of the gurus, I guess you could say. One of the instructors, Robert Dalton with Precision Tactical, joining me in studio. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Chad, it's a real privilege to be here, and I appreciate you calling me to come up here to field any questions that you may have. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you coming in. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this show is because after taking this course out at SS Outfitters, I think it's something that when people hear Level 1 handgun class, they go, okay, well, what does that mean? Okay, well, I'm going to learn more about the weapon. Okay, I'm going to learn more about shooting. Maybe you got to learn more about the class, I think, because there's so much that's involved in this course that is so important, I think, for everybody to learn and go through at least once. And I know we had somebody in there who had gone through twice in that course. Tell folks about this Level 1 handgun training course, just kind of the basic foundation of it and why y'all decided to put this on.
When we talk about the Level 1, you can look at it this way, beginning. We set this criteria up to where we cater to those individuals who have already obtained a concealed handgun license or license to carry, and there's appropriate reasons for that. As a foundation, when you set it up, it's paramount, in our opinion, that once you get your license to carry, the second step is to make sure that you get a very good civil liability policy to cover you in the event of. Then you have to follow that up with quality training. Now, there's a lot of very qualified instructors out there, but also there's some instructors out there that really don't need to be instructing.
Right.
What we do is we try to fill a void. Now, I've spent over 30 years as an instructor training police officers. That's both local, state, federal agents, and we've trained hundreds and hundreds of them in a variety of disciplines. Well, what we saw is, me and my co-instructor, is there's this void, and the void is the private sector. The private sector, if you see the sheer increase in licensed carry holders in Texas, it's just astronomical now.
Yeah.
Well, if you've got that, you've got to address that with viable training. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to be interested in it, but if they're serious about it, they need to continue that training. There's never a finish line. You don't go through this one course and all of a sudden, okay, now I'm through. You got to crawl before you walk and walk before you run.
What's the difference between what you're doing and going out to a range and shooting at a target and going, okay, well, I'm training?
That's the one thing that we don't do. We don't go out, put people on a firing line, and then run a bunch of rounds and punch holes in paper, because really you're not accomplishing anything except expending ammunition. And if you're doing it incorrectly or poorly, you're going to be really good at doing it poorly. What we do is, and I'm real proud of this aspect of it, we limit our class enrollment. And the reason we do that is because you keep your numbers down, you keep your quality instruction up. We look at each individual participant, and then we critique what they're doing, and we analyze what techniques they're employing. We're going to show them the basics, because realistically, teaching somebody how to shoot is very simple. People complicate that. But to be able to analyze them and cater to exactly what that person's doing is, I think that's the biggest thing that we do and we bring to the table. And we have shooters repeatedly come out and say, boy, I thought I could shoot. One thing that we're really, really tickled about is if somebody takes our course, I will guarantee you they are going to leave that course better than they were when they got there.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, it's also something where you're spending a lot of time, and I don't think people, when they first take this class, they probably won't expect the one-on-one, the attention that y'all spend on each person.
And that's exactly right. And that's one of the reasons when you went through the course, you probably didn't know what to expect.
Yeah.
And by going through that course, you say, wow, this is completely different than anything I've been through. And you've been a shooter for a long time. Yeah. And you came in with a well above average skill set, but I'm willing to bet that when you left, you were better than you were when you got there. Yeah. And that individual attention is vital. And I'm going to tell you another reason why. There are people that will come through this class that have a very low confidence level with a firearm. It's amazing to me how many people will purchase a firearm and not even read the manual first. But then they come out and they're afraid of it. Or you'll get those individuals that are too confident with it. And by working with them, this is the big thing, our foundation. Safety first, having fun second, building confidence third. If you build confidence through the knowledge of being able to manipulate that weapon, what it does, what it's capable of, and then you polish that skill set, that's where you build your confidence.
How many people in your time of doing this, and I know at SS Outfitters we've done one class. Obviously, you've been an instructor for a long time. You've talked to a lot of people. Is there a problem with civilians who, when they're taking this class, or maybe that you've just run into, who go, yeah, you know what, if there's a shooting at the South Plains Mall, I'm going to run in there. I'm going to run in there and I'm going to save the day. Do you find that that's an issue with people, that they have too much, that they they think that they can just run in there and do something about it and that everything's going to be okay?
There are individuals that they may adopt that attitude. But they don't understand something. If you're not trained in the dynamics associated with a violent confrontation, and the mass majority of our participants don't have a clue. Yeah. That's why in that class, one thing with the first half of the day, all we do is cover this basic philosophy. What can I expect prior to, during, and immediately after a violent confrontation? Because people don't think about that. Mm-hmm. They think about this sterile environment that, well, I've got this skill set, I'm going to address it, I'm going to go ahead and engage this individual, when they've never even attended a force-on-force training seminar where they're put in that position. And I can tell you from a law enforcement perspective, we've done, I can't tell you how many classes on force-on-force training, simunition, UTM, whatever it may be, with law enforcement professionals. And even law enforcement professionals don't get caught up in this. If you're a police officer, you've got it all. That's not true. Police officers have to train too. How many of them really didn't know what to expect until they go through a force-on-force? Well, the same thing can relate to the private sector. But I do believe this, in our question and answer period at the end when we critique the course, the participants stand up and it's an eye-opening experience for them because they say, I never thought about that. Yeah. I never thought about that.
Yeah. I know one of the things before we take our first break, and then when we come back, I want to talk about what we saw in Santa Fe with the school shooting and how to address, that. And what parents need to talk about with their kids, what parents and maybe even teachers need to know about that type of environment. So I want to get to that when we come back. But first, before we get to the break, when you're taking the course, you're not selling anything. You're not selling anything. You're not trying to make people buy a certain insurance policy or anything. But you bring that up, and you brought it up earlier about getting insurance and liability. Why is that so important for you?
Well, people get into this and they want a license to carry because they say, well, I want to protect myself or my family. Well, that's true. You're protecting yourself from violent confrontation, but you have to protect yourself civilly too, because here is what's going to happen. If you are involved in a violent confrontation, there is a high likelihood that you're going to end up in civil court. You're going to be named in a lawsuit. They can ruin you financially just going through the system. And if it ruins you financially, that has a direct impact on you, your future, and your family. And it is silly to me to think, well, I'm going to accept the responsibility of carrying a firearm, but I'm just going to lapse on the rest of this. I think they go hand in hand.
I think when you were talking about that, obviously you get into a lot of it in the course. I think it opens some people's eyes when you were talking about that.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and take the break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation. We're going to talk about school shootings, mass shootings in general, and what people need to be thinking about, and really what parents need to talk about with their kids when it gets to that situation, if, God forbid, it ever happens. We'll be right back. Back on the Chad Hasty Show News Talk, KFYO. Robert Dalton with Precision Tactical Level 1 handgun class that you have out at SS Outfitters, Highway 114 in Levelland. He's back in studio with us. And before we get into school shootings, mass shootings, what parents and everybody needs to know, a little bit more about this course. It is an in-depth course. It is, 8 hours? Is that how long we were out there?
8.5 hours.
Yeah.
Supposed to be 8. But sometimes we run a little long, but that's okay.
Yeah, 8 hours. But it doesn't drag. You're not dragging. You're not. I mean, it's full of information. You're going to be learning all day long. For those who are interested in taking the course, I think the next course is coming up on June 23rd.
That's correct.
Okay, out at SS Outfitters. What are the expectations? What do they need to bring with them? What type of gun do they need to bring? Holster? What do they need to bring?
If they'll go to SS Outfitters website and they'll click on the tab that says Level 1 handgun, it'll answer 99% of their questions. If it doesn't, my contact information is on there. Give me a call. I'll address all issues, but it will tell them everything they need to bring as far as equipment and gear, and we brown bag it. You bring your lunch with you because we don't have time to go to town.
Yeah. Let's talk about this school shooting that happened in Santa Fe, and I know this is something that you've thought about, and I think every law enforcement officer they think about this now. School shootings, mass shootings. They you train for this. What do parents need to know?
Boy, that's a big question right there. There's so much. One of the things that I think, and I'm an absolute proponent of this, the mental health issues. People have to be vigilant. And if you look, there are students that are in schools that have issues, whatever it may be, but you have to be vigilant. The parents that have a problem child, and they're out there, these kids that are constantly violating the rules of the school, conduct, whatever it may be, schools are hamstringed with a lot of these issues on how much they can do, what they can't do, because it's not like when I went to school. That was a different situation. Yeah. They dealt with it immediately. This is a different environment. What parents need to know is, first and foremost, if you have firearms in your residence, they have to be secured and locked up. That to me is just a foundational thought. The parents that have a special needs child, I'm talking about kids that have anger management issues, they have violent tendencies. Those kids have to be addressed and impacted by the system. And I'll say this, the system has to do a better job of meeting those needs, even if it means getting that student out of that environment.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned in the classroom when before we went out and shot was, the incident the reported incident that happened out at Friendship when there was, I think, the rumor of a shooter out at Friendship, and everybody responded. You had officers who responded on the scene. You brought up something that I think kind of, made the light bulb go off in a lot of people's minds who were in that classroom, and that was students and cell phones and what they're doing with cell phones when an officer comes in.
Social media, I consider that a curse. It's amazing to me how many young people, even in the face of danger, they want to be on, whether it be YouTube or Facebook or whatever it may be. Well, in this situation, as tactical officers are responding and they're entering these rooms and they're scanning, they're looking for any potential threat. You've got students that have their cell phones up and they're videotaping these officers entering. Well, from the perspective of law enforcement, when we go through a door, if we see somebody holding a black object up and pointing it toward us, our first thought is not, well, they must have their cell phone up and they're videoing us. It really puts officers in a situation where they have to consider that to be a threat, and then they have to de-escalate very quickly.
Yeah,
it's just a bad situation when young people are not doing what they're supposed to, and that's keeping those cell phones up, keeping them off, being in a secure location, and barricade yourself in and wait for law enforcement response.
Well, when you really think about it and go through the process, in most of these classrooms, what I think they're kind of taught to do is turn off the lights, get back, get away from the front, get away from the door. When an officer goes in and people start bringing up their hands in a drawing motion, if it's dark in there, you don't know what's going on.
Well, and let's say hypothetically that an officer responds with lethal force, and that student loses their life.
Yeah.
The law enforcement officer is crucified in the public opinion theater, as opposed to, wait a minute, you don't have all the facts. You don't know what that officer faced, because an officer has to make a decision in a split second.
Yeah.
And it can be avoided. It can be avoided.
So these are things that, obviously I think parents need to talk about with their kids. We talk about how to better enforce security in schools. What you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, another thing that needs to be talked about too is officers have to. You're not going to eliminate chaos. You can reduce it. When officers are responding to this location, you're going to have a large contingency of badges that respond to that location. But you have many issues you have to deal with. You have a potential threat inside the complex, but you also have parents that are responding to that location because they want to make sure their kid's safe. You don't know which parents are carrying a concealed weapon, but you have to deal with the external aspect of it with all these other people showing up.
Yeah.
So the parents need to just, hey, listen, get with your schools. They have a protocol. Educate yourself on exactly how that needs to be handled.
Do you like the idea that schools go through active shooter drills?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that if a school does not go through that type of training to at least acclimate themselves to what to expect to some degree, you're behind the curve.
Yeah. It's interesting. I know it's something that a lot of people are talking about these days with active shooters, with school shootings. You can't prevent all of them. But you can hopefully give more information to parents and kids and teachers as well, and hopefully get more information out there.
It is. Another thing that I think that schools should do, if they don't do, is you need to open up an anonymous line where people can call in if they have concerns and give information to schools, because they may not want to go to the principal's office and say, hey, little Johnny over here, I overheard him say that he was going to bring a gun to school. That may happen. But if there's an anonymous source where they can send that into school and then the counselors and administration can address that, you might eliminate some of these problems, because if you'll think about it, we're not talking about terrorism here. We're talking about domestic violence that bleeds over into that environment.
Yeah. Got about 2 minutes left with Robert Dalton here in studio. Going back to the course and just, mass shooting events or just a shooting event, or, where you're confronted with somebody. I spoke earlier, it's come out that it took about 4 minutes response time, and that was because there were officers who were actually at the school. One thing you talk about in the course and why it's important to train is you're not going to always have 4 minutes to respond if you are someone who is being attacked.
That's exactly right. And what we're trying to do is build your confidence, build your skill set, help you self-analyze how you can be better. And remember something, you're not a police officer, but you do have a right to protect yourself and a third party.
Yeah. And how long does the average attack last?
Oh, seconds. It's over with so quickly in most situations. It's not like a long duration situation. Most of these situations, unless that individual flees that location, law enforcement's looking for them, but that's not the initial encounter.
Yeah.
The initial encounter is over with very quickly.
Yeah, that's why it's important to have that training. And, of course, you can get more information at SS Outfitters. That you can get signed up there. June 23rd, the next class.
We welcome everybody that has a CHL or LTC.
Bring water.
Bring water.
You're going to need it. Bring some water out there. Robert Dalton, appreciate your time today.
Man, thank you very much.